Some more reactions to some elite prospects rankings, picks 21 through 32. We'll also talk about Corey Pronman's rankings. There are a lot of shockers in there. All that coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi joined by Sebastian High, and on today's episode, we'll be breaking down picks 21 through 32 of Elite Prospects November rankings. And continuing on the rankings ride, we'll talk about Corey Pronman's rankings as well. There are some doozies in there. We'll break those down for you on today's show. Before we get into any of that, just want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always very much appreciated. So let's get started here with our continuation on last episode. We'll talk about the kind of picks 21 to 32 and also the honorable mentions for elite prospects. We'll start off with Aron Kiviharju at 21. I think that's a great place to start. Kiviharju's out for a long time. We're not sure exactly what the time frame for return is for him, but he suffered a major injury. And even before that injury, there were some struggles, some concerns with this game that kind of left him off of kind of our top 15 board. I'm still on the fence about him between 15 and 20. And I definitely understand why he's at 21 on Elite Prospects board. The breakout game's really solid, right? I mean, that's pretty much his biggest strength. But outside of that, what are your major concerns for him?
Kiviharju's game is definitely based on his brain. He is a highly intelligent player, and he's one of the most composed defenders that I've seen in the pro ranks in recent drafts. Under pressure, even like under pressure from multiple forecheckers, he consistently makes good decisions. He finds simple, creative solutions that just solve the problem quite easily, and then he will continue to attack in the breakout because, as you said, that is a big strength of his, and his overall offensive transition game is very impressive. What I do think is interesting in EP's ranking here is one of the arguments that they make with this ranking is correlating Kiviharju to other undersized puck-moving defensemen that we've seen come out of Sweden in recent years, ranging from Adam Boqvist to Erik Brandstrom to Nils Lundqvist, Victor Soderstrom, so on and so forth. There's quite a long list there of puck-moving Swedish defensemen European defensemen that got drafted in the top 20 range, who looked very refined in their draft years and really failed to take that next step at the NHL level to become those high-end top 4 defensemen that they were projected to be at the draft. And I understand that argument really well. And I think that as far as ranking Kiviharju out to the top 20 goes, I much prefer this reasoning to anything ranging from injury to being undersized and other arguments that I'm sure we're going to see as the year continues with Kiviharju in rankings. But I think I personally would still disagree here. I'd have him probably 6 to 10 slots higher than this, but I can understand it, and it's still very much early on in the season. But I think that injury has definitely hurt Kiviharju's chances of kind of shaking off that moniker. So, I think it's a very interesting ranking, and I understand the rationale there for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Moving on to Beckett Seneke, right winger out of the Oshawa Generals in the OHL. Prospect who I've been kind of on the fence about as well. Not really too convinced with the off puck game. Plays a decent kind of straightforward game. Likes to move forward, in the offensive zone and activate really well. He's got a big body. He's able to protect the puck well. His shooting's really good. He's pretty smart. But I do have questions about the decision making at times. I mean, there are times where he'll rush plays he shouldn't, that kind of stuff. So I'm still on the fence about him. He's probably in the latter half of my first round, definitely in the kind of the 20 to 30 range. So this is right about at the higher end of where I'd have him. But at 23, we have a very interesting, very polarizing player in Cole Hudson. Cole Hudson is Lane Hudson, but everything just jacked up to 100. The offensive skill is really impressive. The creativity, the intelligence is really on display whenever he has a puck. He's one of the most dynamic players in this draft, but the defensive game is a big issue. The defensive skating as well has been a bit more of a concern for me. I see a lot more, projectability in his offensive skating, his ability to use crossovers to get up the ice quickly. But as soon as it comes to skating backwards, to lateral crossovers heading back, it's a bit iffy. So big kind of area of concern for me here with Cole Hudson. But Andrew Basha at 24th overall is a player that neither one of us really kind of had going in the first round until we started kind of honing in on the skill set a bit more. We talked about him very briefly in last episode. He's a very dynamic, very quick player. Transition game is where he shines. He's got a high motor as well. I have a bit more questions about the toolkit though. It's on and off. And then EJ Emery's when we hit the B tier at 25th overall. He played a bit of the year with Cole Hudson as his D partner at the NTDP. And yeah, the mobility is really solid. It's just there's not much of an offensive toolkit for me there, right? I mean, what have you seen from EJ Emery that would justify a 25th overall pick here?
I think that his transition defending is one of the things I've really liked, and I know that
Yeah.
transition defending is one of the big things that EP looks at, especially with bigger physical defensemen being
Mhm.
really, really important. And I think that's a very, very good tool to kind of hedge your bets on. That said, I'm still with you in terms of the offensive skill, still needing to take a couple more steps. And I think as of right now, he wouldn't feature inside my first round. But my viewing so far of him that have been actually like direct viewings rather than passing viewings have been a bit more limited. So I'm going to hold off on making any big takes on Emery as of yet because I'd like to catch a couple in-depth viewings before I make any sweeping statements here.
Absolutely makes sense. Ryerson Leanders, we've got our first goaltender at 26 overall. Elite Prospects describes him as a smooth, controlled mover, and it's been really obvious in my viewings of him. I mean, he controls the crease really well. He moves in the crease really well. And the issue is with him, he's not necessarily one of those bigger goaltenders that teams look for, and I'd be very surprised to see him go in the first round, given that. But he compensates for his lack of size really well, and he just has a feel for the direction of the puck that's really good. He's able to redirect pucks into corners. He's able to anticipate where the puck is going before the shooter gets the pass, which is really important as a goaltender. So yeah, and his rebound control is extremely solid. So I've been impressed with what I've seen from him. But again, smaller goaltenders and NHL teams, it's not a winning combo usually. They don't like those. But yeah, we'll see how the season goes for him. He's been really solid though. 920 save percentage in 10 games for Mississauga so far. So been fairly impressed. Emil Hemming at 27th overall. This is right about where I'd have him. This is almost exactly where I'd have him. He's the type of player who has a really good shot. He's able to beat goaltenders clean. It reminds me a bit of Kasper Halttunen, but with a
Yeah.
bit more variety to his game. Um, and yeah, he's limited. His playmaking and his defensive game are kind of concerns. But you've seen a bit more of him. Talk me through kind of what Emil Hemming what encapsulates Emil Hemming as a player.
For me, what encapsulates him really is the shooting, and I've also quite liked his ability to find soft ice in the offensive zone.
Yeah.
He's one of the better off puck movers among like the sniper power forward mold in this year's draft class, and I've been a fan of that. I've definitely not seen too much playmaking out of him just yet. I'd like to see him pass a bit more in the offensive zone and use his teammates more effectively. I assume lose possession quite a few times, but just trying to do a little bit too much on his own. And I think slightly overestimating his own on-puck capabilities. I think he'd be a lot more effective if he were kind of leaning more towards those quick puck touches and using his teammates going for the give and goes rather than trying to carry up the puck through the slot on his own. Because that's not really what his toolkit shines as. But as you said, I think this is entirely his range, and kind of similar to Halttunen last year. There's a couple of really nice tools here in terms of the goal scoring, and everything else is still kind of a work in progress. But I've seen enough progression to rank him inside the first round so far this season too.
Absolutely. Now, for our second segment, we'll talk about picks 28 through 32, and also talk about some honorable mentions here to close things off on the Elite Prospects rankings. We'll get into that right after these messages here at Locked On NHL Prospects.
Kick off the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. Whether you want to bet on your favorite team winning a game, or your favorite player scoring a touchdown, or maybe there's a quarterback in the NFL that you don't like very much and you think is going to throw an interception, you can bet on all of that on FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
All right, so picks 28 through 32 and the honorable mentions for elite prospects are up. And this is a very interesting kind of batch of players. A lot of players that either we have higher, we didn't expect to be this high, or just overall have some really good thoughts on. So we'll start off with Terik Parascak out of the Prince George Cougars in the WHL. You look at his production as of the writing of the rankings of elite prospects. He had 29 points in 14 games. He's a goal per game, playing extremely well. You look at his totals and think, why is he not higher? Well, there are some concerns with this game. He's a poor skater. He's not the type of player who's going to blow you away with his speed. His puck skills themselves. I mean, his shot, even though he has a goal per game, they haven't. He hasn't been beating goaltenders clean with hard wristers. A lot of his goals come off one-touch plays close to the net. But that's also a pointer to why he's producing so well. Is that he's an incredibly, incredibly intelligent player. In the multiple viewings I've had of him, the main comparative that always comes to mind is draft year Nick Suzuki. And Nick Suzuki followed a progression that no one expected. His skating blew everyone away by his second year in the OHL. His puck skills got a lot better. He got a lot better at beating goaltenders clean from the right circle, as he does right now in the NHL. The things that make him tick, the things that make him a top line player on the Montreal Canadiens, are things that he developed post draft. But if you look at his skill set in his draft year, very similar to Parascak. Parascak's able to identify and anticipate his teammates' routes before anyone can see them. I remember a specific pass I watched of his where he received the puck in the neutral zone from his defender with his back to the play pretty much. And he kind of made this one-touch throw into the offensive zone just after the blue line. And if you just screenshot at the moment he releases a pass, you think, yeah, that's just a bad dump in. But at the moment the pass leaves his stick, out of nowhere, his teammate just comes right into that route, and you can tell that that's what Parascak wanted. His teammate gets the puck right after the offensive blue line, heads in for a breakaway that really just came out of nowhere. I mean, his playmaking kind of savvy, his intelligence, and his anticipation of play allows him to not only make great passes to great areas, but allows him to move off the puck and find great spaces to shoot. So I've been really impressed with the way his mind works. I just don't think the body's anywhere near it. And this is about where I'd have Parascak so far. And when I say draft year Nick Suzuki, I really mean draft year Nick Suzuki, not current Nick Suzuki, because current Nick Suzuki is a completely different player than Parascak. And then he was in his draft year, obviously. But then at 29 and 30, this is a back-to-back that I'm really confused about. And we've had this conversation before. Maxime Massé at 29, a right winger out of Chicoutimi, and Sacha Boisvert out of Muskegon in the USHL. Two Quebecers that I would have in very different tiers, right? I mean, you look at Massé and Parascak, and they're just completely different skill sets, right?
Yeah, I mean, Massé is a player whose value comes from being that high intensity, powerful winger. He has a good shot. I've seen him make some really impressive passes when he sees a pass. And like that actual like raw passing ability in terms of mechanics is quite solid. And at the Hlinka, I remember being quite impressed with that intensity, with the physicality. He was pretty unrivaled on a Canadian roster in those areas. But I think the scanning habits has been one thing that our team has been repeatedly concerned with throughout this season. The lack thereof, which has been a concerning degree of lack of scanning in our viewing so far. And I think that 29 is definitely within the conceivable range from my perspective, but it's probably the upper end of it. Whereas I know that you are a very big fan of Sacha Boisvert. So what for you kind of makes that difference between these two Quebecois forwards?
Well, Maxime Marseille is definitely a better skater, even though both of them are kind of below average for me. Boisvert's skating is a bit more of a concern. But the difference with Boisvert is his intelligence and his understanding of his surroundings is unrivaled, and I think that by far blows Maxime Marseille out of the water in terms of skill sets. His intelligence, his awareness, his ability to identify quickly what his next play is something I haven't seen yet from Marseille by any means, and it's obviously the scanning habits that make that big difference. But also, Boisvert has this really interesting skill set. At the start of the year, I don't think he could not score a highlight reel goal. I mean, everything he did was just so impressive. It's kind of cooled down as the season went on. His skill set has become a bit more kind of methodical and projectable. Whereas at the start of the year, he was just kind of gung hoing his way through everyone. I've been really impressed with that. But yeah, in both cases, the skating is an issue. But for me, the intelligence on Boisvert puts him in a different tier. It's not even close. At 31, though, we have Tanner Howe, and this is very low for my liking. Tanner Howe has shown me time and time again that he deserves to be a top 20 pick. He's been playing in every situation on a very poor Regina team and extremely poorly surrounded. He's by far the leader in points on his team. He's a captain of his team at 18. He's been playing incredibly impressive hockey, especially defensively, especially in terms of intensity. But there's also some really interesting things to like about his skill set. He's a good handler. He's a really good passer. His shot is kind of whippy and short released and very accurate. But most of his goals will come from close range at the NHL level. But for me, I see Howe as a shoe-in NHLer at one point. It's just a matter of whether he makes it on a second line or on a bottom six. I think bottom six is a bit more realistic, but we've seen these players go very high in their draft years. So I'd be surprised if Howe stays at that 31 slot. I'd be very surprised to see him not go at least in the top 20. And that's where I have him right now in kind of the 15 to 20 range. But you've watched a lot of pick number 32 here, Henry Mews.
A lot.
Talk me through what you've seen from him. Yeah, you're from Ottawa. You go to their games often. Talk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching him since he had his OHL debut. I catch live viewings of him on pretty much a weekly basis at this point. He's been very fun. He's currently injured, so Ottawa 67's games are a little bit less entertaining at the moment. But this is a highly mobile defenseman who, in my eyes, has a significant upside based on the tools, which EP also highlighted in their little player profile here. This is a player who is one of the better players in the OHL at matching as like footwork while defending the rush. He keeps his gaps tight. I'd like to see more aggression in his game. There have been flashes of it in the last 2 years, but it's been far from consistent.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see the similar thing in the offensive zone, more aggression, which is also what Elite Prospects is highlighting here. Though they did say that his activation is a strength, which I haven't quite seen so far. Like he rarely activates confidently above the hash marks. Whenever he goes beyond there's hesitation and concern of needing to get right back to the blue line. And I think there's also part of Ottawa's system being rather conservative and wanting their defensemen to kind of lay back a little bit. It was the same thing last year with Mintyukov, who, I mean, is already lighting up the NHL right now and is looking more dynamic at NHL viewings now than he did in Ottawa in the OHL last year because of constraints that he had in his game, like kind of enforced on him. And I'm seeing a similar thing with Mews this year too. So I'd love to see him be a bit more creative, lean into the skill a bit more, because as of right now, with how he's playing in Ottawa, he's developing as like a solid two-way piece that could maybe be like a number 4, number 5 long-term in the NHL. But he has the toolkit to really be a high-end top 4 defenseman if he were to really lean into it. And I think that the flashes of creativity are there. I'd like to see him ranked a little bit higher because of that. I think that there are systemic reasons that are limiting him and limiting what he's able to kind of showcase this season so far. But this is a toolsy player, and especially in a draft class like this year's, which has a lack of those high-end tool players like we saw last year, for instance. I would be probably like making a pretty big push for Mews once we hit like that 25 range on our board. So I think 32 is perhaps a little bit low. But yeah, he's a fun player, but there's definitely a lot of question marks here, and I can see why he would fall this far because yeah, lots of questions remaining here. And I've watched basically every home game he's played in the OHL so far, and I still have questions. So
Yeah.
understandable to have him a bit lower here for sure.
Absolutely. We have 9 honorable mentions here. 4 of them are defensemen. Let's compare them really quickly. We have Charlie Elick, Tomasz Galvas, Will Skahan, and Carter Yakimchuk as our 4 honorable mentions at D, with Mews at 32. Are there any one of those 4 that you take ahead of him, real quick?
I think Skahan is the only one that I see an argument for, and I probably side with Muse, but I think that debate becomes a bit more philosophical in terms of style rather than actual value as a draft pick.
Absolutely. We have one goaltender in the honorable mentions in Carter George out of the Owen Sound Attack in the OHL. We talked about Elick and Skahan and Galvash. I mean, these are really good defensemen. I just don't think either one of them, apart from maybe Skahan, cuts our top 32. We have Cole Baudouin, who has been really impressed with out of Barrie. He's been playing a bit of time, on their first line with some of their top end players, including Bo Jelsma, who's really ripping it up right now. Adam Yeko out of the Edmonton Oil Kings has been decent, but he's really inconsistent. We'll talk about that a bit later on as well. And Simon Zetter is a player I haven't really heard of yet. He plays in Rögle out of Sweden. Not really an area I've scouted too much, and definitely a player we'll be keeping a close look on as the season goes on. But that wraps things up for our second segment. We'll be moving on to our third segment where we talk about Corey Pronman's rankings and kind of break down some surprises there. We'll get into that right after these messages here at Locked On NHL Prospects from our sponsors over at Sleeper.
This new NHL season comes with all sorts of possibilities. Will Cole Caulfield score 50 goals? Will the Colorado Avalanche win another Stanley Cup? Who knows? But you can get involved with hockey this season with Daily Fantasy Hockey on Sleeper, our number one choice for daily fantasy hockey. Which players do you think you will take this week to win 100 times your money? Will it be Pavel Mintyukov or Leo Carlson, who are lighting it up as rookies for the Anaheim Ducks? Or are you going to play it safe with guys like Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby? The choice is yours. All you have to do is pick whether studs will record more or less the sleeper projections for all sorts of stats, ranging from goals to assists and hits and more. And to win 100 times your bet on Sleeper, all you need to do is to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you can get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.
All right, so moving on to our final segment, we'll talk about Corey Pronman's rankings for the 2024 NHL Draft. They came out a couple days ago as of the day of recording today. So let's talk about them a bit because there are some major surprises. First and foremost, Anton Silayev is the second overall pick so far in Corey Pronman's rankings. I do not know how I feel about this. There have been like so far there have been like 2 games where Silayev played so well that if he played that way the whole season, I could see an argument. But the inconsistency is really bad. Like it's bad, right?
It's gotten better as the years progressed.
Yeah.
I mean, I know when we first started talking about Silayev on this podcast, I know I was a pretty big skeptic, and but everything we've seen recently has been a lot more impressive to me. I'm going to be making a case for him inside our top 10 at Dobber, which is, I mean, higher than other places like EP have him ranked. I'm quite a big fan of his game at this point. I think that the combination of reach, mobility, defensive awareness, and physicality is really enticing. I think the defensive awareness is quite solid. That said, 2 is really bullish here. I think it is perhaps being quite selective in terms of how you interpret the offensive production with Silayev here, and maybe reading a bit into that early season start where he was almost a point a game. And while that's cooled off, he's been so much better since then. And I think that the value here comes from his defensive game. And I'm not sure that I would spend a second overall pick on a player whose projection really relies primarily on the defense. And I'm a massive fan of high-end defensive defensemen, but 2 is high here for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to pick number 6, a player we don't really have ranked, and a player who was an honorable mention in Elite Prospects rankings, and Carter Yakimchuk. Is there anything in this game that you see that could explain this, or that could at least you know be a justification for him being even a top 20 pick? Is that something that you could see? Because if you read Corey Pronman's kind of breakdown, he talks about the dynamism, he talks about the offensive skills, the goal scoring touch, um, and that combination with his frame and the fact that he's right-handed. I could understand a team wanting to take this direction, but I don't see enough there. Do you?
Not yet. With Yakimchuk, there are some nice flashes of offense. That's for sure.
Mhm.
That said, for every flash of nice offense, I see multiple concerning plays that make him a play that I wouldn't be ranking inside my top 20, let alone my top 10 at this point.
Yeah.
But that said, I liked him a lot more with the Hlinka than I have early on this season. So there's definitely still room to grow there. And while the production's been excellent this year so far in the WHL, it
Mhm.
kind of more along the Silayev lines there, where I still have many questions on the actual projectability of that offense. He has a good shot for sure, and I think a lot of the production's been coming off of that shot as a threat and as a method of creating rebounds. But top 6th overall is certainly bullish once again here for another big physical defenseman.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of, a lot of the names we'll mention here are defensemen, by the way. But yeah, we have Matvei Shuravin here, who's a player that I watched very slightly in passing and found decent, but nothing really worth it. A 17th overall pick. Um, in Shuravin, you're getting a decently sized but also very mobile defenseman. His breakout game's fairly solid. He's very composed. But I don't see enough of a kind of base of skill. His intelligence is really good. His ability to understand how play develops is really good, but he's a good skater, but not necessarily physical. His defensive awareness is on and off. He's a bit too calm sometimes. There are moments where you got to just throw the puck up the boards because you've got like three guys closing down on you. There's still elements of his game that kind of lack in that sense. So he's a player that I would start considering in kind of the mid second round. But have you watched any of Shravin so far, and what's your take on him?
Only a little bit, and I agree with you on that. I think that there have been nice flashes. I quite like the mobility. I think that in the KHL, he's been showing a bit more composure than you'd expect for a draft eligible defenseman in that league. But I think so far, I think top 20 is a little bit higher than I'd have him for sure. Especially when you're ranking above other players like Igor Chernyshov, we are very big fans of Chernyshov. I think there's going to be a running theme this year
Yeah.
that we kind of pump his tires relative to other outlets. But Sharavin's been solid, but I think for top 20 ranking, I'm looking for more than just solid. At least like early on the season, you kind of want to hedge your bets on the high upside players, especially, and then with time throughout the season, you can kind of whittle that down to the players that are then more projectable in those assets.
Mhm.
And Shuravin, I think, is fairly projectable, but I'm not really seeing like top 3 defenseman upside here.
Yeah, absolutely. Some more defensemen here. We've got two back to back that are from the Swedish junior 20 level. We'll start with Dominik Badinka out of Malmö. He's got him ranked at 23. He's a player who moved from Finland to Sweden. He's decent in terms of skill and pace. I just don't see him as a kind of top end offensive player, and I don't see him as a top end defensive player either. He's kind of a no man's land for me in terms of his skill set. I have trouble a bit kind of defining him. He's a jack of all trades, master of none type of player. And I like particular skill sets. I like when I watch a player and I'm like, okay, this is something you can build around. I don't see that yet with Badinka. So we'll see how that develops. But you have Leo Salin Valenius out of Växjö in the Swedish Junior League, and he's been a bit more impressive for me. He's a player that I can look at his skill set and go, okay, this is something you can build around. And the thing you can build around with Salin Valenius is the breakout game and the offensive activation. He's a player who understands how to move, up the zone really well. His defensive game's a bit off, even though he's a really, really good skater. Um, I've been having issues with his gap control, with his pivots. Sometimes he has trouble kind of gauging how fast players are coming at him, and he can get caught flat-footed. But there were a lot of very interesting offensive plays that he made all over the ice. So that's a player I've been fairly impressed with, and a player that I could see making a top 32. Like, not yet. I'm pretty sure he's going to be at the start of our second round. Probably going to be an honorable mention in the top 32 that we'll build up this next weekend. But really good hands, really good vision. He's got a decent shot. And yeah, I've liked what I've seen from him overall. But to end things off, let's talk about Matvei Shuravin, because he's a player we've both watched slightly. I've watched a bit more of him just by virtue of watching Sasha Boisvert a lot. He's his line mate, and they've been feeding off each other fairly well. But what's your take on Shuravin so far?
He's been fun. I mean, definitely up the alley of entertaining draft eligible USHL player. Uh, I'm not quite sure he's quite as exciting as another Russian winger that was playing with Muskegon in his draft year, Daniil Gushchin.
Yeah.
But he's been solid in my viewing. It's like I've liked the offensive skill. I like the mobility. I think that there's a decent amount of creativity there. And while I think that like 33 is a bit higher than I'd be willing to go just yet, I don't think it's like unreasonable either at this stage.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that wraps things up for our final segment in our show for today. Thank you very much for tuning in for our breakdown of elite prospects and Corey Pronman's rankings. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on in sports. And make sure to tune in for our next episode as we continue our prospects content for the week. This has been Hadi with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.